Okay, so question 4 of exothermic and endothermic reactions. This one's asking us to actually look at a experiment this time and how we'd actually carry it out. So we're going to be recording the temperature change of a reaction between a solid metal and a solution of acid. So in order to do that experiment, it's asking us for 3 essential pieces of apparatus. So in the first instance, we're going to measure a temperature change. So it's probably a good idea to have a thermometer on hand to measure those temperature changes. As we've said, we're going to be using powdered samples of zinc, so solids. So we're going to have to be able to measure out a mass balance or use a mass balance to measure out the masses of solid. And we're probably going to need to have some sort of vessel to do the reaction in. Now, ordinarily, you could use a glass beaker, try to insulate that somehow by wrapping it in cotton wool or something like that. But obviously, with a temperature experiment, it's always a good idea, if you can, to do it in some sort of polystyrene cup, because then you've got much better insulated material to do the reaction in the first place. And it's always helpful with these types of reaction if you can do them with a lid as well. So try to put a bit more detail then into the method this time. I'll write bullet points as we go along, but describing a method of how the testing is going to be carried out, we're going to have experimental conditions and then obviously some sort of control to make sure we can do the reaction properly. So you write these in full sentences, obviously. This is one of these leveled questions, so depending on how much detail you put in and how much accuracy you get into your experiment, you can get 1 or 2, or 3 or 4, or 5 or 6 marks, obviously, for the question. So we'd have to measure a volume of acid. Okay, we'd have to measure a volume of acid. Now, you can give value if you want, so 25 centimeters cubed is probably a good idea. And put that into the cup, put that into the polystyrene cup. We'd need to have a certain amount of solid. Okay, so ideally, same number of moles would be a good idea. So measure same number of moles of the solids. Okay, so we'd need to have that, okay, of each of the solids, so each of the metals. So you'd have a different mass, okay, but a different with a different mass of each of the solids, but you'd have the same number of moles. So that will be one of your control variables. Likewise, take into account same surface area, things like that. And likewise, have the same initial temperature of the acid if you can as well. Again, along with that, you would have to measure the initial temperature of acid, because in order to measure the temperature change, you need to know what it starts at. So measure the initial temperature of the acid with your thermometer. Okay, you then need to do the experiment. So pour the solid into the cup. This is then going to react with the acid which is already in there, and you need to measure temperature change. Now, there's a couple of ways you could do this. You could record it every 30 seconds for, say, 5 minutes and plot a graph, cooling curve, which is a little bit more advanced. Or you could simply record the maximum temperature that you observed over that 5-minute period. Once you've got that, you would obviously have to repeat the experiment, keeping control variables the same, surface area, initial temperatures, volumes, etc. And then average any results you had for the same metals, repeating it with each of the metals in turn.